Hello, can you hear me? Hi everyone, and wow, thank you all for coming. I didn't think this many people would turn up to this lecture, so I'm actually really just a bit overwhelmed with happiness right now. So yes, thank you for coming to the first ever Pride lecture, and we're hopefully going to have this as a regular series every year. And the goal of the Pride lecture is to essentially celebrate and share the contributions that the speaker today has given to their field of physics and also to being LGBT plus in STEM. So yes, I'm very excited to introduce Professor Peter Coles from Maynooth University. Professor Coles did his undergraduate degree at Magdalen College, Cambridge, and graduated in 1985. Yes, and then moved on to doing a DPhil in theoretical physics at the University of Sussex and stayed there for 2 more years to do a postdoc. He then moved on to Queen Mary's University, where he was an SERC Advanced Fellow, and in 1999 moved to be a Professor of Astrophysics at the University of Nottingham. And that was until 2007, when he moved to Cardiff University to be a Professor of Theoretical Physics. From February 2013 until July 2016, he was the head of mathematical and physical sciences at the University of Sussex. He then spent a year at Cardiff, and then finally moving to Maynooth University in 2017, where he's been ever since. So I will hand it over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Jake. First mistake, I didn't turn the microphone on. So thank you, and it's a great to be invited to give the first and hopefully not the last of these Pride lectures. Because there's no precedent for this, I wasn't quite sure what to do. So what I've tried to do in this talk is to kind of mix things that I don't normally mix when I give talks. I find it quite easy to talk about cosmology or astrophysics and things like that. I find it less easy to talk about personal things. So the difficult parts of this talk for me are going to be those parts. And therefore I've padded it out with bits and pieces of cosmology to make it easier for me to do it. So what I want to do is to not give a sort of long biography, but just pick up some kind of perhaps interesting things that have happened over the time that I've been in the field and indeed on the planet. So as Jake said, I did my PhD, I started my PhD in 1985, that's almost 40 years ago. And lots of things in cosmology have changed. And lots of things in everyday life have changed for me and for other people here, no doubt, as well. So I thought I'd try and sort of interweave the two things and just see how it goes. And well, I've written it now, so it's not very good. It's just not very good. So, when I was thinking, I got the invitation to do this a while ago, and I wasn't sure who was going to be in the audience, whether it would be cosmology people or physics people or whatever. So I thought I'd introduce, and when I got the invitation, there was all this fuss going on about the eclipse in America, you know, and all the excitement. And so it reminded me of the last time there was an eclipse visible from the total eclipse of the sun visible from the UK, which was in 1999. I actually went to Alderney and had a very good view of it. But I just loved this from the Times. You won't be able to read it all here, but I thought, because it explains what a cosmologist is. Sorry?
Could you turn the lights on?
I could do that, but I'm going to blow up the bit that's. I can go over here and demonstrate my technical knowledge. Which one is it? one touch. We did actually practice about 10 times before we found the right setting to work it. So this was ahead of the eclipse, which actually the only place in England where it was supposed to be visible in totality was Cornwall. And ahead of the eclipse, there were lots of worries about all the people rushing to Cornwall to see it. And it resulted in this article in the Times. This is not a crummy tabloid story, it's the Times. Actually, it is a crummy tabloid, the Times. But anyway, now I was just going to highlight, if I can do that, a little paragraph there I've blown up, which tells you everything you want to know about what a cosmologist does. So Cornwall fears an invasion of 6 million visitors causing water shortages, sewage lakes, and typhoid outbreaks as New Age travelers, cosmologists, druids, and assorted pagans arrive to commune with earth, heaven, myth, and mystery. So there's a good description of a cosmologist. Not. I did actually write a letter to the Times complaining that as a cosmologist, I thought this was insulting to druids. But they didn't print it. So cosmology, of course, isn't anything to do with New Age travelers. Well, not much anyway. But it is to do with the universe as a whole. And I'll come back to how I, kind of wandered into the field of cosmology as the talk goes on. So actually, Jake said a little bit about biography. I'm not going to give an official details about this. Some of my colleagues are in the audience, so they'll know about this. They've seen my CV, and you can get it all from there. I was actually born in Newcastle upon Tyne. You would not have guessed that because I don't have a trace of an accent. I was born actually in a place called Walker Gate, which was next to the shipyards, but during the 1980s, all the shipyards were closed. I actually grew up in a part of Newcastle called Benwell, which was a pretty rough area, and I was not from a wealthy family. It was a surprise to everybody that I got a scholarship to get into the grammar school. Everyone else in my family went to the comprehensive. This was in the 70s, when there was a sort of bifurcation at age 11 as to which kind of school you went into. So I went to the Royal Grammar School, which was essentially a private school, but the local authorities would pay the fees for scholarship kids to go there. The year after I got in, that system, called the direct grant system, was scrapped. But the local authority agreed to pay for everyone who got in until they finished. And I made use of it because I went all the way through and did the 7th term so I could do Cambridge entry at the end of it without paying. So I've always been an ambition of mine to be a burden on the taxpayer, and I actually managed to do it pretty well. So I went to the Royal Grammar School and I stayed through, now I should say that nobody in my family had ever been to university before. Nobody has since, actually, to be honest. But I went to Cambridge. In Cambridge, this is Oxford, I know, but it's on the other side of the country. There's a small university in Cambridge. If you wanted to do science in Cambridge, you had to do natural sciences, which was a general field, which I was expecting to do chemistry, because my best teacher at school was a chemist. He actually had a PhD from Oxford University. Actually, no, he didn't. He had a DPhil from Oxford University. He was my best teacher, and I went assuming that I would continue with chemistry, but I just enjoyed physics more in the first year. I had no intention of doing astronomy or anything like that. I'll put in a word for Maynooth, actually. Maynooth's general science program has exactly the same structure as that thing in Cambridge had. And so lots of people switch. They come thinking they're going to do chemistry and end up doing physics. And I think one of the problems of the British education system is that it tends to lock people in too early before they've really decided what it is that they're going to like. Anyway, that's a side issue. So I went to Cambridge, had no plans as to what I was going to do afterwards. I got to the final year, Easter of the final year, and I thought, oh, what am I going to do next? There was no internet or World Wide Web or anything in those days. if you wanted to find out about PhD things, you had to write to departments and they would send you a sort of list of possible projects in the post. Some places replied, some didn't. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Now, nowadays, I know there's young people in the audience, when you apply for a PhD, you're expected to have a pretty good idea what it is you want to work on. I had no idea. I applied in star formation, galaxy formation, active galaxies, and cosmology. Anyway, I got an interview at Sussex. And when I went into Sussex, by chance, I didn't know anybody there. And I didn't know my prospective supervisor by reputation. It was a guy called John Barrow. Had I known who he was, I would have been terrified of him, but I didn't. And he was impressed by the fact that while I was between doing the entrance exam to Cambridge and actually starting my undergraduate degree, I'd worked doing computer programming at a British gas establishment in Northumberland, the online inspection centre. So I had quite good programming skills, and John, to the end of his life, never had any programming skills at all. And I think he thought I would be useful. That's why I got a PhD placement. Anyway, more of that later. So I ended up with a PhD DPhil at Sussex and various faculty jobs, as Jake has mentioned. So that's my official CV. And that's what university web pages put. There's a side story which is actually more descriptive of how I see my life than just the academic side. And, oh, actually, I just put this picture in because it's rather nice. It's a bit grainy, I'm afraid, but this is, a lot of you won't know where Maynooth is. Maynooth is in County Kildare. It's about 25 kilometres inland from Dublin, due west towards Galway. So it's actually quite, and it began life in the very late 18th century as a Roman Catholic seminary. And this is St. Patrick's House, the main camp building on the South Campus, which used to be the seminary building. And it was actually designed by Auguste Pugin. So it's actually a very nice building. When I first arrived in Maynooth, I actually stayed in a room on there, which is quite nice. So that's just to tell you what Maynooth is. So now back to the thread that I was at before, which is to say what the unofficial CV I have, which various people here know, but most people won't, which is that basically I knew that I was gay at a very early age, earlier than I can really remember. And I had my first sexual experiences when I was very young as well, probably too young looking back at it. But I can tell you exactly when. I won't draw diagrams or anything like that, but I can tell you that it was on the day of the Queen's Silver Jubilee, which was quite a long time ago. And you can work out, if you work that out, so you can work out when that was and how underage I was. My partner at the time was an older boy, a few years older than me, but the age of consent in those days was 21. We both thought that because we were both heavily underage, we weren't breaking the law. That seemed to would make sense if the law said that, but it actually was untrue. We were both breaking the law, but nobody found out. There were no witnesses. So that was that. In those days, in the 70s, growing up as a gay teenager in Newcastle was quite difficult. There was a sort of underground gay culture, if you could call it that. But the thing that I remember most is there were absolutely no positive images of gay people at that time at all. I was walking around Oxford yesterday, I arrived yesterday, and that's all the pride flags up everywhere. There's pride flags at the airport and pride flags everywhere. No sign of anything like that back in the 70s. Everyone I knew who was not gay then had very hostile attitudes toward gay people. And the images on the TV were pretty negative, and so there were no positive images at all. And in fact, I remember thinking that I was basically the view that we were told was that older gay men, like the age that I am now, were all sexual predators and were preying on young people. And that was one negative stereotype. And the other thing was that it had an effect on people who were young, like I was then, that they actually, many of them believed the negative publicity about gay people and became very self-critical as a result, self-hating. And there were many people that I knew at that time who were gay, who were totally closeted and actually did believe the negative publicity that was being promulgated at that time. So when I went to, so my story was basically I had a relationship when I was very young. The older boy that I was with for a while left to go to university, and I was left at school. I was too young to go to university then. That therefore finished at that point. When I went to Cambridge, it was all very difficult. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to find other gay people. I didn't know any gay people there. So I went sort of back into the closet when I was an undergraduate. But after 3 years at Cambridge, I'd had enough of Cambridge. I went to Brighton, the University of Sussex, because I'd read things about Brighton. And I got offered a PhD place there. And Brighton, all the things I'd read about Brighton turned out to be true. And the first week that I was at the University of Sussex, I joined what was called the Gay SOC. It's an undergraduate, a student society. I'll actually come back to that later. So that's a little taster of some of the biographical stuff that I'll talk about. What did I end up doing when I went to do my PhD? Well, I usually say that what I work on is large-scale structure of the universe. And for those of you who are not in cosmology or not even in physics, perhaps, I'll give a very brief overview of the kind of state of play that things were when I started my PhD in 1985. This has actually been quite a lot of fun putting this together because I managed to find lots of very old slides that I used to use in talks, and I delivered, because it's this kind of retro talk, I put a few of them in. So large-scale structure to me actually means anything on the scale of the universe that's much bigger than an individual galaxy. So generally speaking, we think of galaxies as the atoms that we deal with. So there's a galaxy, that's the Andromeda nebula. Oh, it's upside down. I'll put it the right way up. So while I was still at school, in 1980, I was in the sixth form. I wandered into a bookshop in Newcastle and bought this book, The Large-Scale Structure of the Universe by Jim Peebles. And Jim Peebles, of course, got the Nobel Prize a few years ago. I can't remember. I actually did one of the first conferences I went to. I met Jim Peebles, and such an extraordinary, nice gentleman he is as well. So that was great. But you see, this is a bit dog-eared, this thing. But I bought it when I was still at school. I used to walk around holding this book. I didn't understand a word that was in it. But I like this picture, for example. This shows the distribution of galaxies in the Lick survey. So this is not even each dot being a galaxy. The sky is divided into little cells, and the galaxies are counted in those cells. So it's a sort of grayscale. I was fascinated at the age of, when was it, 17 or 18, by this kind of picture and what you could do it. And I could understand at least that what this book was about. How many of you read Large-Scale Structure of the Universe? All of it? Yes. You're more determined than I am. There are parts of it which are quite impenetrable, I think, but it is a fantastic collection of things in there. So, as I said, I went and worked on statistics and things at British Gas, and that gave me a bit of preparation. It's just another version of the same picture. There's actually something like 800,000 galaxies in that image, no stars. So this is what the universe looks like, but of course we didn't have distances. We just saw the galaxy positions on the sky, and two chaps, Shane and Buchanan, counted images of galaxies in little squares. And there's quite some interesting psychological effects of Shane came in the morning and had a lot of coffee, he'd see a lot of galaxies, and the next day he wouldn't see quite so many. So it's actually quite interesting to use this from a statistical point of view because of biases and things in it. Now here, just go a little bit of background. This is a picture of Hubble, Edwin Hubble with the funny trousers. And he, of course, established a relationship. Well, he's credited with establishing a relationship between the distance of galaxies and their apparent recession velocity, which he did using spectra obtained by Vesto Slipher, not by himself, which actually showed that you see here are some spectra from Hubble's time. This galaxy here is small because it's far away. There's a Father Ted reference for you there. And this is large because it's nearby. And you see this doublet here is actually moving to longer wavelengths the more distant the galaxy is. So that's the redshift. And this is interpreted, this is a very old slide, as you can tell. This is interpreted as light travels through an expanding universe, the wavelength gets stretched in between launch and arrival. So that's how we explain the redshift, the expansion of the universe nowadays. But of course, Hubble didn't know anything about this. This is not the way he interpreted. In fact, he never talked about the expansion of the universe at all, really. Anyway, velocity is proportional to distance is the Hubble law. And it is actually, can be made exact, provided you're careful how you define velocity and how you define distance. But the thing was that if you believe this redshift distance relationship, you can actually use redshifts of galaxies to map the radial distance. So you don't just have the positions on the skies. And so now I go back to the 80s. That was roughly when I started. I've mentioned that I accepted a PhD place under the supervision of John Barrow, who very sadly passed away a few years ago. I don't really know how I can pay tribute to John Barrow because actually everything that I've achieved in cosmology, meager as it is actually down to him. He was a great PhD supervisor. He put me on, he was very prescient in choosing problems that were kind of ahead of their time, but just enough ahead of the time that they would actually be useful in a few years' time, which is great for a PhD student. So this is a tribute to John. As I said before, I didn't know who he was when I arrived, and he's a prolific author and playwright, as well as outstanding physicist, fellow of the Royal Society. So one of the first papers I was given in 1985 was a preprint of this, De Lapparent, Geller, and Huckra. I know Ofer is at the back. He started the same year. He would have got the same thing. This is the final version. So you can see these are galaxies on the sky. And what they did was take a narrow strip between these two tick marks here and measure the spectrum of each galaxy, get a redshift, and then you are here, and then you can see the velocity there from the redshift, and that's proportional to the distance. So you can now start to see the three-dimensional nature of galaxy clustering. It's three-dimensional because, well, it's sort of two-dimensional here because this is just a very narrow strip in declination. So here's another one. John Barrow, also famous for writing books about the anthropic principle, which is the idea that somehow the universe is designed, well, there's various versions of the principle, the universe is designed to allow human life. And here you see a striking example of some little man in the middle of the large-scale structure. Well, I don't know if it's a man, to be honest. Okay, so time for a bit of audience participation. I won't actually do this, but I do this in popular talks. Why was I interested in statistics? Well, it was because when we got more and more and more of this data from galaxy redshift surveys, that plot there only had a few thousand galaxies in it, right? Now we've got millions of redshifts, but we really want to understand how to treat them. We have to use statistical methods. And this is an interesting one, which I use in public talks. is that one of these plots shows a completely random distribution of points with no clustering. And is it the left one or the right one?
Right one.
Let's take a vote. How many think it's the left? How many think it's the right? How many don't think? So it's actually quite even, right? Actually, this distribution is completely random. This is far too smooth to be random. There's an avoidance of God. This actually is not, I got this from a biology book. This is actually a simulation of the distribution of a kind of glowworms. And what happens with glowworms is that they get too close together, one of them eats the other one. So they avoid each other. So you'll see that actually in totally random point distribution, there are filaments and clusters and things that your eye is very good at seeing. And I found this really interesting. How do you get beyond what your eye is telling you about things and actually quantify the real pattern above what is just noise? And that's part of the things that we're working on cosmology now. The other thing that I wanted to do in my thesis was that the theory of how this large-scale structure came about was that, well, things are the way they are because they were the way they were, and the universe must have had fluctuations very early on that eventually turned into galaxies. And this is a later graphic from the WMAP era, sort of 2005, showing that the idea is that this is the distribution of galaxies we have now. We think the universe is about 14 billion years old. If there were fluctuations in the very early universe, which 1980s theories suggested, and John Barrow, my supervisor, was very active in working on the theory of cosmic inflation and the fluctuations therefrom, then basically the universe acts as a kind of amplifier that turns these very small initial fluctuations into big clumpy things like large-scale structure. And we ought to be able to see the imprint of these fluctuations very early on in the universe, not at a redshift of 0.5. Now, here's another trip down, a bit of a digression. I remember one of the first conferences I went to in the 80s was called the High Redshift Universe. And people were talking about high redshift galaxies being redshift 0.5. Well, now, of course, we've got galaxies with JWST and whatnot to 14, I think, is the record we have now. So that's when the universe is expanded by a factor of 15, not 50%. So this is actually quite an extraordinary. So this early stage would be the universe as it was at a redshift 1,000 or more, and we ought to be able to see the imprint of these primordial fluctuations in the microwave background. Now, it was great in 1985 when I started. There were no measurements of the cosmic microwave background. Theorists' paradise, no data. So I thought, well, John, I said, I want you to calculate properties of the primordial density impact on the CMB. And I said, well, doesn't it bother you that there's no measurements? And he said, no, there will be, but we need to know what to do with the data when we've got it. So I did simulations, and these look pathetic by modern standards. You have no idea how long it took me to do these, but these are kind of hot spots and cold spots in the microwave background produced in certain models. And these are from my PhD thesis. I was almost tempted to use a crayon to color in the contours because everything's in color now, but I thought glorious monochrome would be better. So of course it was in the early 90s that we actually measured the fluctuations. I say we, it wasn't me, it was the Kobe team who did it. These are in much larger scales than I calculated in the things I did in my thesis. And then subsequently, I'll show a couple of other pictures later on. Now, this brings me to one of the themes of this talk, which is the importance of being lucky. I've mentioned it before. I was extremely lucky to get John Barrow as my supervisor. I was extremely lucky to be in the period that I was when there was no data. A lot of things were easy. I was extremely lucky to go and have some practice writing proper Fortran code before I went to university. So I was well ahead of other people there. None of this is due to some intrinsic cleverness by my part. It was just pure luck, being in the right place at the right time. And I'm going to extend that theme a little bit now. So how many of you watched It's a Sin? Not many? I'm quite surprised on this. It was made of... So I watched this during pandemic. It's a Channel 4 program. So actually, here's an interesting bit of biography. This drama series was about a group of young people who were all 18 years old in 1981, which is exactly the same age that I was in 1981. So when I saw the first episode for this, it really hit. It was like, this is about me. It's like being in a history program about yourself. So you feel kind of old. So that dates me, and It's a Sin was basically about the repressive attitude of the 1980s, and especially, let me just mention these here, the very hostile campaign from the government at the time, Thatcher's government, to the infamous Don't Die of Ignorance campaign to stop the spread of AIDS, and also the repressive Section 28 of the Local Government Act. So as well as going to Sussex and starting my PhD in cosmology, I was stuck in the middle of all of this. I wasn't in London like the characters in It's a Sin. And here is a very personal admission that I, for a long time, did not know why I was still alive, because I indulged in extremely risky behavior throughout the 80s until about 1988. Unprotected sex and all that. It was only, it took a long time before anyone would get through me how dangerous that was. Eventually, with my partner at the time, we agreed, like the two characters did in It's a Sin, to be tested. I got tested for HIV, and assuming that I would be positive, and it came back negative, and I didn't believe it, and I had another test, and that also came back negative. I had friends who caught HIV, some of whom are still alive, some of whom didn't make it. But this was the environment that was going on while I was trying to do my PhD. And you have sort of choice to make when things deeply personal like this going on, when you're working about how open you are about it and how you deal with it. So in response to this, I did actually officially come out in my department because I overheard a very horrible conversation going on between two other members of the department about gays carrying diseases and all that. And I got involved in the HIV helpline in Brighton. I did what I could, and I also, against Section 28 was my first ever political demonstration that I went on. We failed in stopping Section 28, but Section 28 was repealed eventually, I think, in 2004, if I remember the history right. But we built alliances then, and that, in retrospect, that was the good thing. Now, a few years ago, by accident, I was talking to an expert in genetics, and I mentioned that I don't understand really how I survived the 80s. And he said, would you consent to having a full genome list test on you? So you get CDs full of incomprehensible, so I don't know anything about genetics really. And then I got the answer, which is that I'm a mutant. I carry, so I have the power to set bells off when I say things. So I actually carry a mutation called the delta 32 mutation, which about 10% of the population of Northern Europe has on one gene, and about 1% have on both. And if you have it on both, it confers almost total immunity to HIV infection. And it's thought that this mutation happened about 1,000 years ago in a single individual in Scandinavia, and was carried passively through the population. That explains the 10%, 1% thing. I must have inherited from both parents because I have it on homozygotic. And it's just popular. It's not selected for any reason at all. By the time you come to HIV, it turns out that people who have this are immune. And I only found this out 2 or 3 years ago. So this is why I'm still alive. And forget about having the right PhD supervisor or having, choosing the right project or knowing how to program in Fortran. This is, look, I didn't know I had this, and thank my lucky stars, I thought I was on borrowed time, and it's really incredible to think now that I actually understand why it is that I'm still alive. It changes your life when you realize something like that. Something buried in your metabolism somewhere in your DNA structure has protected you all this time, and you didn't know anything about it. Anyway, so now another very personal thing. So I actually, as a reward for nothing if not a cheapskate. And so I volunteered to have my DNA, my genome analyzed, and I got offered the chance that if I wouldn't have to pay to have that. You can actually pay to have that, anyone can do that. If I didn't pay for it, if I turned out to have the Delta 32 mutation, then I would volunteer to take part in a trial, various other aspects of it, which I'm now doing. So I have medical questionnaires to fill in every now and again. Now, another very personal thing happened in the 80s, which also changed my life, not for the better. So one night, in the middle of all this, I think I've tried to explain the environment. I was walking home from a nightclub in Brighton. The nightclub was on the seafront, and I lived some way from the seafront. I just crossed the road, and I was attacked by 4 young men, beaten unconscious. They were shouting faggot. It was fairly obvious what their motive was. I was unconscious for some time. I don't know how long. Somebody rescued me and got me home. But I didn't report it to the police. You didn't in those days. It was pointless. I was quite badly beaten up. I had cuts and bruises, black eye, fat lip. But I didn't have any treatment. And the problem was that within a short time, I started to have serious psychological problems as a result of this. I think I'd fallen down and hit my head on the curb, which had caused a sort of concussion. So about a few weeks later, I was in Waitrose on Western Avenue in Brighton, queuing. I had a few things in my hand, coffee, maybe milk and coffee, trivial things like this. And suddenly I had a complete psychotic episode. I could hear sounds. All the images of everything around me went swirling around like this. I could hear voices. I could hear everyone turned into a sort of monstrous figure. And I totally freaked out, as you probably would, and ran out of the supermarket, still holding the things there. The security guard obviously thought I was trying to steal a coffee or something. So I was grappled to the ground, police arrived, and there was another new invention in the 1980s called being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And that's what happened. I got sectioned, and I was treated a little bit in the prison, in the police station, but then I found myself taken involuntarily to Hellingley Psychiatric Hospital in West Sussex. If you've ever seen sort of Victorian Gothic horror movies, Victorian psychiatric hospitals look exactly like the Hammer House of Horror or whatever it is. It was a terrifying place. And I was in there for several weeks until they realized what had happened, and I was on medication. That was in the last year of my PhD. I actually still managed to finish in 3 years, returned, but I had to take quite a lot of time out. And they made it very clear that they didn't think they'd treated what I had. And it has come back from time to time. Not so badly recently, but I did have a severe episode 12 years ago where I ended up in a psychiatric institution as well. Now I'm going to just say a thing here. It's something I have to live with. My life changed at that point. I know when it's going to happen, so I have escape plans, contingencies if it does. So, and I live a pretty normal life, I guess. But people say that, you know, when people use a word, a slur, they don't necessarily understand how impactful that word can be. So every time I hear that particular word, it takes me right back. So if you think, you know, free speech is absolute, no, it's not. People shouldn't be using words like that, because you never know how much damage that's causing to someone. Okay? I'm going to take a deep breath here, because that was difficult. Okay. And now my thing is conked out. Let's see if I can get this. It seems to have frozen. Oh, what's happened here? Okay, right. It just froze for a moment. I've got a very old laptop, it's just frozen. How are we doing for time, by the way? Ooh. I'll hurry up. So at the time, I had two kind of conflicting attitudes. One is that I thought after this episode, right, forget about straight people. They're always going to be horrible. I'm not totally convinced that the people who did that to me were actually straight, or whether they had their own issues to be dealing with, but nevertheless. So I was for a while a complete separatist. I shopped in gay shops, went to gay clubs, I just avoided straight people altogether. I realized that was a mistake now, because, you know, equal marriage and the repeal of Section 28 involve building alliances, and you don't get on in life by being a separatist in that sense. Every time Pride Month comes around, though, it does make me reflect on the fact that how remarkably tolerant I am of the other thing which I'll say is about inclusion. I mentioned earlier that I joined the Gay SOC. That was it. It was really a male gay organization at the university student level. After a couple of years, it became lesbian and gay SOC. Whoa. And then there was a debate about, while I was still at Sussex, about whether to include bisexual people. 3 times we had a debate, and 3 times it was voted down. So LGB didn't happen until after I'd left Sussex. And that's not because I was the one who was voting it down. So there was a lot of resistance in some quarters to having bisexual people here, feeling, put it very crudely, that bisexual people could not be trusted. A feeling I did not share. But we see this now that, you know, there are parts of the community who don't want to include trans people. And I just see that as very sad, given the history that we've had trying to build alliances and show solidarity with each other. Being exclusive like that is not good, and it's not healthy, and it's in fact really bad. So that's all I'll say about that. Now, I'm going to accelerate because I've waffled on quite a lot. So back to the 90s and cosmology. So we started to get a lot more data around about 1990. This is the survey that was actually, Steve Maddox was the principal investigator on that. And we started to get really big galaxy redshift surveys. This is the 2-degree field galaxy redshift. So the little stickman picture that I showed you would have fitted in something like here on this one. So there's, you can see the large-scale structure of the universe being unveiled in 3D. This is an early, so these are, the experts will be saying these are all old pictures, but it's because they were from the time that I'm talking about. This is the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, part thereof. So we now have a lot of data, and the model of the universe was changing in the 90s. So I thought I'd show you this one. A lot of cosmology focuses about trying basic parameters of how much matter there is, what kind of matter it is, how quickly it's expanding. So this is from 1996. That's actually me in the middle, believe it or not. That's John Peacock, Alain Blanchard, Vincent Icky, Bernard Jones, a long-standing collaborator, lovely guy. And we had a panel discussion in one of the sessions at this conference to write down our favorite cosmological parameters. And you see, out of all of us, only one person got it right. If you know anything about the Standard Model, it's Rien van der Weegaard, who is here, Hubble constant of 70, matter of 0.3, lambda 0.7, age of the universe 14. Round of applause for Rien van der Weegaard. He can't hear you, of course, but he's still in the field. I was hopeless. You know, I just had an open universe with no lambda. I still don't like the cosmological constant, by the way. I'm not sure it likes me or either. Don't care, really. And of course, we got much more data about the microwave background, higher resolution data, and Planck. And now we have decimal places on all the cosmological parameters. You don't expect it to read that. It's just to say that we've got more precise numbers. Whether they're more accurate numbers is another question, but there's much more precision now about basic cosmological parameters. So we live in a world where the standard model of cosmology is called the concordance cosmology. And it's kind of astonishing that we combine all of the data we have from the microwave background, from all the galaxy clustering measurements. We also have new kinds of measurements like weak gravitational lensing, baryon acoustic oscillations, Lyman alpha forest. We put them all together, and there's a model that copes pretty well with all of that huge amount of data we have now with just 6 parameters. So that's pretty impressive. And so this is the way I think about it. So here's a cosmologist, obviously, here in the middle. And there's a lot of sort of self-satisfied glow here. Everything's in heavenly harmony. But art can tell you a lot about science. So if you stand back from this picture and take a more balanced view, you can see that on the surface it all looks great, but underneath it there's a whole kind of load of stuff that you're not quite sure what's going on. I don't, I'm pretty sure these are graduate students down here, but anyway, the point is that the whole model is a model. It's got quite a lot of things in it which could be wrong and which we haven't really tested fully. Here's a list of the real set of ingredients of the standard model. And I thought I'd complement that list with a list of the questionable aspects of the standard model. So any one or combination of those things could actually turn out to be not quite true. And it's very important to test those things. So what am I doing now? I'm actually, but for at least part of my time, working on Euclid. This is the Euclid mission. This is official kind of press image. Euclid is basically, space experiments all look the same. They look like little dustbins, basically. The Euclid is quite a big dustbin. It's a 1.2 diameter mirror, but it's in space, and it's been was launched last summer, and it's the survey, which is going to provide us with literally billions of galaxy images and redshift, so we can test this model even more rigorously, particularly with respect to the lambda part, the cosmological constant. Apologies for those of you who don't know what cosmological constant is. I didn't have time to explain it, but it's lambda. So here we are. Actually, my university really likes me to show this picture because Maynooth is the only Irish university involved in Euclid. I can't see it. Where is it? It's in the middle somewhere because it's M. Left a bit. Yeah, there we are. There's Maynooth. And so this kind of brings everything full circle, I think, two ways. First of all, what I found most of the time is that I the Euclid Consortium Diversity Committee, and I've volunteered to do it largely because of my own history. For that shouldn't need to repeat. But it's actually quite an interesting thing because it's not just about straight and gay or male and female or ethnicity. It's also a consortium of about 2,500 people in different countries. Also people who work on instrumentation, people who work on theory, people who work as software engineers and so on. And we all have to work together. And the principle of the diversity committee is very simple, as it should be in all institutions, which is that you just be aware of the fact that there are people in that group, however big it is, who are different from you. And it's incumbent on you to include them in whatever you do and make sure you don't exclude by accident or deliberately. And so the diversity committee tries to get everybody to feel equally rewarded regardless of where they are. I didn't mention seniority. That's another. There are professors and there are graduate students as well. So there's a whole kind of set of things going on here. Now, I have to say this is not an easy job because there's 2,500 people, but Euclid doesn't employ any of them. Don't have any employment law behind you when you do things like this, try to tell people to behave themselves. They're all employed by their own institutions, not by the Euclid Consortium. So this is difficult, but it's important. And it's a rather onerous thing. And I have to say, I finished my term, 4-year term on the diversity committee at the end of this month. So I'll be taking a sigh of relief and going and actually doing a little bit more science. Anyway, I wanted to end with just this statement that although there are people in many quarters who give the whole EDI, what's the slang? DEI people in America say this, means didn't earn it. It's sort of tokenistic response. I don't believe that at all. I think the people who think that diversity doesn't matter are the people who need more to be aware of what diversity issues are and what we can do to help make sure the system works better for everyone. And that's particularly true now in the sort of industrial scale projects that we have in cosmology, not just in cosmology, but in other fields now as well. So I think that's it.
Wow, thank you so much, Peter. Does anyone have any questions for Peter?
Hi, thank you for that excellent talk. I had a question. You said at the end of your PhD at Sussex, it was still LG, not LGB. Was that reflected across is that like a reflection across the UK, or is that just like Sussex?
I think, well, I can't speak for every student society. I mean, so we actually didn't use letters in those days. It was gay soc, and then it was lesbian and gay soc. But the LGB thing came later, and various different. So I went to a talk quite a long time. I think it was UCL that actually had the first gay soc, way back in the 70s. But it was still gay soc then, and there's a whole archive about it. It's actually really interesting to see how it changed. I don't know. So Sussex, being in Brighton, was quite forward in having a gay soc. Other universities, I mean, when I was an undergraduate at Cambridge, there was a gay soc, but I didn't participate in it. I'd kind of gone back into the closet then, and I did. So I don't know about other universities, but I think it was the issue of whether to include bisexual people was a pretty controversial one. It seems pathetic going back and thinking about that now, but it was. And the T came along later. I actually didn't, when I was an undergraduate and a postgraduate, I didn't know any trans people at all. And there was omission by ignorance, basically. As soon as the awareness of trans issues started to come up, then being fully supportive of including everybody as part of it's a little bit uncomfortable to have the alphabet soup of letters, I think. We really need a better way of doing it, but I'm quite happy with LGBTQIA+. It's not that many letters. I don't know what it's worth at Scrabble, but, you know. So yeah, it's strange how, you know, the people from the 1970s who consider that, oh, we did a load of stuff in the 70s, we were progressive, and they think that being a progressive sort of stops, and you're left with it. You know, if you're seriously arguing that you want to go back to the 1970s, that's not being a progressive, that's a reactionary, right? And so there's scope for including people all the time, and I think that's a lesson we learned from the student gay socks, etc.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I have one, and then we can go for some drink. Oh, James.
You get a lot of exercise if you do it all yourself.
Yeah, so there are obviously well-publicized kind of culture war type things where stuff is weaponized by certain portions of whatever, yeah, politicians and so on. But even among people who you might consider to be on the right side of that debate, you know, who are more aware of these kind of things, there must be various issues you come across that are pernicious, or I don't know. So I was just wondering what your perspective is from doing stuff like the Euclid diversity chair, in terms of like what the most common issues that come up are, in terms of, you know, is it like out and out bigotry or ignorance about the issues that people face, that kind of thing? Well,
I have to be careful it's being recorded.
Yeah, sorry.
I have to be careful a little bit, because I don't want to give any sort of, a lot of things we deal with are confidential things, grievances and so on. I would say the vast majority of issues that come up are careless and unthinking rather than bigotry. I would say also that it's very nationality dependent. So the whole sort of EDI thing is probably stronger in the UK than it is, say, in Italy. I don't think that's a controversial statement. We do have, and also there are, so it's different in different places. Now, Germany, for example, has a very rigid hierarchical structure in academia. I mean, we do a bit in the UK and Ireland, but it's extreme in Germany. And I think that I'm actually, over the years, I didn't go into this, but I've become quite hostile to hierarchies, because I think they allow pernicious behavior to continue. So basically, if you're at the top, you can get away with things. And a lot of this actually comes from the experience of the Catholic Church in Ireland. You know, I think the sexual abuse that went on in the Catholic Church in Ireland is basically that Ireland went from being a Catholic theocracy to being a totally secular country, because the moral authority of the Catholic Church just disappeared. But it's when you have a hierarchy where the people at the top can protect themselves from the people lower down who are actually doing all the work, then that's unhealthy. So I think, you think about universities, for example, most of the terms that we have in university administration are inherited from church. Things, deans, rectors, things like that, they're all from, the structure is very hierarchical. So if we can somehow move to a more level, more equal, and more respective structure, then I think that would help with a lot of these things. But it's largely, I mean, there are some cases in astronomy. How many of you are actually working in astronomy and astrophysics? Is it everybody or most people? You must be aware that there are some high-profile scandals about sexual harassment and so on. I have no way of knowing whether those are widespread in other fields as well. It could be that there are more visible ones in astronomy because people are now starting to report things that have been going on for a long time. I just don't know whether that's true or not. That's the sort of thing that comes up as grievance cases. It's largely, well, you know, I'll say another thing which I probably shouldn't say, which is that scientists, when they're flung into a big consortium like this, suddenly have to find management skills. And it's assumed that if you've got 500 publications and an H-index of 55 or whatever it is, then somehow you're automatically going to be good at managing people. Well, that's just not true. Even people who have had proper management training struggle in high-pressure environments. And Euclid, post-launch Euclid is really like that. So I think a lot of it is just lack of training and lack of awareness and how to manage people. I've said a number of times, astrophysics is easy compared with people. It's true. People are very difficult to manage. They keep having their own opinions. I'm not sure the universe actually has opinions, but it can be awkward. You know, it doesn't do what you expect it to do. But you see what I mean? It's the personal skill. How do you learn those things? We don't get taught those in an undergraduate degree or anywhere else, really. So I think a lot of it is just kind of thoughtless and lack of management awareness and so on, but exacerbated by the fact that the manager actually has too much power to start with.
Okay, one last question, and then we'll go for some briefs.
Thanks for the great talk, Peter. Very honest. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I expect an honest reply. I think we first met in 1990 or 91 in Durham. There was a NATO school. Do you remember?
I don't remember the precise date.
Anyway, but I think I remember that you were wearing leathers and looked like a skinhead. Is this possible?
So it round about.
Think back.
So I didn't bring back. Didn't bring So so when I came out in Brighton, I sort of became a scene queen, you know, and I dressed the way everyone dressed in the club, even when I was at work. So I had a leather biker's jacket, and I had cropped hair and a flat top, and I wore Levi 501s and Doc Martens shoes. Okay. And I had a bandana in the appropriate pocket. And I did that all of the time. So you probably not a skinhead, but probably a flat top. I had a flat.
Right. Okay. I was just going to ask. I guess skinheads did have some unusual alliances in their time.
No, I was never one of. I was ever a skinhead. I wasn't. But there were gay skinheads. There was a.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. Were there in fact gay skinheads?
They were, yes.
I see.
And it was.
That's interesting.
So this is actually a strange thing because, you know, in the 70s when I was at school, there was a period when everyone was into punk rock.
That's right.
That was on it. And I never got into that. But I did get into ska and two-tone.
Two-tone, yes.
Because I really like the sort of inclusivity of that. But there were people on the side of that who were skinheads, who liked the music, but were deeply racist.
That's right.
You get this with, that's why people are so awkward, you know. There are people who somehow manage to live with a sort of, what it seems to be progressive on the one hand, but is a deep-seated bigotry on the other. And you see it quite often in other places. And there are gay men who are quite right-wing. I can't see it. When I look at repression of gay people, I think of Thatcher, and you know, and this is a Tory thing, but it's not. There are lots of right-wing gay people, and I don't understand where they're coming from, but that doesn't make me deny that they exist.
That's diversity for you, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, can we give one round of applause for Peter? So there should be now some wine, beer, fruit juices, and some snacks out in the Martinwood foyer. So if you want to go there and hang out, and we can chat more to Peter then. Thank you everyone for coming. All right, so good.
I just wanted to shake your hand and